The glass fell, the wine spilled, and the laughter pierced her like daggers, but the young waitress didn't lower her head. With a challenge no one expected, she cornered the most arrogant heir in the world of wine. What began as a public humiliation ended up unearthing a secret capable of changing everything. In the golden gloom of a tasting room in the exclusive Rosewood Hotel in New York, where Murano crystal lamps cast reflections that seemed to dance with the aroma of America's most selected wines, a glass shattered against the Italian marble floor, silencing the sophisticated conversations of an elite dressed in designer suits and smiles as sharp as knives. Hope Miller, 22, with light brown hair pulled back in a simple bun and a uniform embroidered with the hotel's name, lowered her gaze as her cheeks flushed like embers. Her green eyes, a legacy from her Spanish grandmother, filled with tears that she refused to shed. She had stumbled while serving a 1989 Chateau Haut-Brion to one of the most important guests at the charity gala. One mistake, just one. But it was enough to become the target of the ruthless gaze of 32-year-old Sebastian Reed, a wine magnate, heir to the most powerful wine distributor in North America, and a man whose arrogance was as polished as the diamonds adorning the fingers of the women present. "How ironic," Sebastian said, picking up another glass with a cutting voice that was heard above the uncomfortable murmur of the room. A waitress trying to serve $1,000 wine. "Do you even know what you have in that glass, little girl?" The sneering laughter cut the air like broken glass, but Hope didn't laugh. With her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it, she looked up and met his steel blue eyes that had despised her without knowing her. In that moment, something ancient awakened in her, a memory that smelled of ripe grapes under the California sun and broken promises under a starry sky. "Give me that glass," she said with a steady voice, although she was shaking inside like grapevine leaves on the eve of a storm. "If I identify the wine, every detail, every note, every vintage, you owe me a favor. Any favor." The room fell into a silence so profound you could hear the ticking of the Swiss clock on the wall. Sebastian smiled with that cruel grin he had perfected in years of ruthless business, like someone who already knew his opponent's inevitable defeat. But he didn't know anything. He didn't know that Hope had been born in a small wine valley in Napa, where her family had cultivated grapes for 4 generations until the property documents mysteriously disappeared when she was 14. Hope took the glass with hands that no longer trembled. She brought it to her nose, closed her eyes, and inhaled deeply. In that instant, she wasn't in a luxurious New York ballroom, but back in the vineyards of her childhood, listening to her grandfather, Michael, explain the secrets the earth held in every grape. "Cabernet Sauvignon," she murmured, opening her eyes. "Chateau Lafite Rothschild 2015, notes of blackcurrant cedar, and a subtle hint of graphite that you only get in years where the September rains were scarce, but the foggy mornings of October were abundant." She took a small sip and continued. "The winemaker used French oak barrels from Vosges, not Allier, because he was looking for that spicy note that would complement the natural botrytis cinerea. The acidity is perfectly balanced at 4.2, which means this wine can age another 30 years without losing its elegance." The silence that followed was deafening. Sebastian, for the first time in years, was speechless. His arrogant smile had vanished like morning dew, replaced by an expression of bewilderment and something that looked like respect. The crowd began to murmur, some voices full of admiration, others of disbelief. Hope placed the glass back on the tray with steady hands and looked Sebastian directly in the eyes. "My favor," she said with a clear, strong voice. "I want you to tell me why the name Reed appears on the expropriation documents for the Golden Valley Vineyard in Napa 8 years ago." This time, it was Sebastian who turned pale. The days following that night were a whirlwind for Hope. The story of the waitress who humiliated the wine magnate spread like wildfire on social media and in gourmet circles across the US. Wine journalists sought her out, renowned winemakers wanted to meet her, and she even received an offer from a major French winery to study with them. But Hope had other plans. She had waited 8 years to have the necessary tools, and now that fate had put Sebastian Reed's name in her path, she wasn't going to waste the opportunity. In the afternoons, after finishing her shift at the hotel, she would go to the main library in New York. There, among piles of legal documents and public records, she began to piece together the puzzle of what had really happened to her family's vineyard. Every paper she found was another piece of the truth that had been buried for years under layers of bureaucracy and corruption. Golden Valley had been more than a vineyard. It had been the heart of her family for 4 generations. Her great-grandfather Emilio had arrived from Spain in 1920 with 3 Tempranillo plants hidden in his luggage and a dream of making wine on American soil. He had chosen Napa because the climate reminded him of La Rioja, and he had built the adobe house where Hope had grown up with his own hands. Her grandfather, Michael, had expanded the vineyard and was the first to experiment with French grapes adapted to the American soil. Her father, Robert, had modernized production and had managed to make their wines compete with the best of California. But in 2016, when Hope was 14, everything fell apart. The ownership papers disappeared from the county clerk's office. From one day to the next, documents appeared showing that the land had been sold to a shell company called Bajío Agricultural Developments, which had immediately resold it to Reed Vineyards for a fraction of its real value. Her family had fought for 2 years in court, spending every last penny on lawyers who promised justice but only brought more debt. Finally, without the resources to continue fighting, they had to accept a miserable settlement and move to New York, where her mother, Carmen, worked cleaning houses, and her father became a night security guard until a heart attack took him 3 years later. Now, as she reviewed the documents with adult eyes and legal knowledge she had acquired from studying at night, Hope began to see the pattern. They weren't the only ones. The shell company had purchased at least 12 small agricultural properties in the region between 2015 and 2017, all with the same modus operandi: lost documents, forced sales, immediate resales to Reed Vineyards. One Thursday afternoon, as she closed one of the files she had obtained through a transparency request, she felt a presence behind her. She turned and found Sebastian Reed standing next to her table, dressed in a casual but elegant suit, the expression on his face very different from the arrogance he had shown at the hotel. "Can I sit down?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Hope studied him for a moment. He no longer looked like the ruthless magnate from that night, but a tired man with dark circles under his eyes that the best makeup couldn't hide. "It's a public library," she replied, without taking her eyes off him. "You don't need my permission." Sebastian sat down slowly, as if every movement cost him a huge effort. For several minutes neither of them spoke. The silence between them was charged with tension, unasked questions, and painful truths floating in the air like suspended dust. "My father died 6 months ago," Sebastian finally said, his voice barely audible. "Cancer. In his last days he was often delirious, but there were moments of lucidity where he talked about things he had done, things he regretted." Hope felt her heart race, but she maintained a neutral expression. "Among his personal papers, I found a safe I had never seen before," Sebastian continued. "Inside, there were documents, contracts, correspondence that should never have existed." He paused and looked directly at her. "Letters where he confessed to having orchestrated the fraudulent purchase of 12 small properties, including Golden Valley." The words fell between them like stones into a deep well. Hope felt the air become dense, almost unbreathable. "And what do you plan to do with that information?" she asked, surprised by how firm her own voice sounded. "It depends on you," Sebastian replied. "I can give you the lands back. I can compensate you financially. I can make everything public and destroy the empire my father built on lies. You decide." Hope watched him for a long moment. In his blue eyes, there was no longer arrogance, but something that looked like vulnerability, guilt. It was strange to see such a powerful man showing himself to be so human. "I don't want your lands back," she finally said. "I don't want anything that was built on my family's pain." "Then what do you want?" Hope closed the file she had open and leaned forward. "I want you to teach me everything you know about the wine business. I want to learn how distribution, export, and international contracts work. And when I'm ready, I'm going to create my own winery. Not with the stolen lands, but with my own effort." Sebastian blinked, clearly disconcerted by the answer. "Is that all?" "No," Hope said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I also want you to help me contact the other 11 families that were swindled. We're going to create a development fund for small vintners, and your company is going to finance it." The proposal was bold, intelligent, and completely unexpected. Sebastian looked at her with a mixture of admiration and respect that he had never felt for anyone. "And if I accept all your terms, then I'll consider forgiving you for your father's sins," Hope replied. "But you'll have to earn my respect day by day like any normal person." For the first time since he had entered the library, Sebastian smiled, but this time it wasn't an arrogant smile, but something genuine, almost vulnerable. "I accept," he said, extending his hand, "but I have one condition, which is that you let me help you not just out of guilt, but because I see something in you that I lost a long time ago." a real passion for wine. And maybe by working with you, I can remember why my grandfather fell in love with this business before it became a soulless empire. Hope looked at the outstretched hand for several seconds. It was a decision that would change the course of her life forever. She could take the easy path, accept financial compensation and move on with her life. Or she could bet on something riskier, working with the son of the man who had destroyed her family, with the hope of building something new and better. Finally, she extended her hand and shook his. "It's a deal," she said, "but if you fail me, there won't be a second chance." "There won't be," Sebastian confirmed. When they left the library together, the afternoon sun was painting the New York sky with golden and pink tones that resembled the color of rosé wine. Neither of them knew that that afternoon marked the beginning of a partnership that would transform not only their lives, but the American wine industry. But it also marked the beginning of something more dangerous and beautiful, a mutual attraction that neither of them was prepared to face. Chapter 2. The next 3 months were an emotional roller coaster for Hope. Every morning at 6, after finishing her night shift at the hotel, she would head to the Reed Vineyards offices in the exclusive financial district of New York. The 12-story glass and steel building stood like a modern giant among the historical colonial buildings of the city, a symbol of the power the Reed family had accumulated over decades. Sebastian had kept his word. Not only had he given her complete access to the company's files, but he had hired the best consultants to teach her about international trade, wine marketing, and business management. But what impressed Hope the most was that he himself dedicated 2 hours every day to working with her, teaching her the secrets he had learned in his years of study in France and California. "Wine isn't just agriculture," Sebastian explained to her one morning while they were reviewing export contracts in his office, from where they could see the whole city stretching out toward the mountains. "It's history, art, science, and passion combined. When you taste a wine, you're tasting the soul of the vineyard, the character of the winemaker, and the personality of the land." Hope listened to every word as if it were a treasure, not only because she needed the information, but because the way Sebastian talked about wine reminded her of her grandfather, Michael. There was something in his voice, a genuine reverence that contrasted completely with the arrogance he had shown that first night. "When did you lose that passion?" she asked him one day as they walked through the company's analysis lab. Sebastian stopped next to a table full of test tubes and barometers. "When my father forced me to study business instead of enology," he replied after a moment. "He said that feelings didn't make money, that I needed to be a businessman, not a dreamer. For years I tried to please him, to be the son he wanted. But in the process, I lost the connection to what I truly loved." "And now?" Sebastian looked at her, and for a moment Hope felt she could see directly into his soul. "Now working with you, I remember why my great-grandfather started all this. He didn't want to build an empire. He wanted to make the best possible wine and share that joy with others." These conversations became more and more frequent and personal. During lunch breaks, they would sit on the building's terrace and share stories of their very different childhoods, united by the same love for wine. Sebastian would tell her about his trips to Bordeaux with his grandfather, where he had learned that each vineyard had its own personality. Hope would describe the mornings at Golden Valley, when she would help her grandfather taste the grapes to determine the perfect time for harvest. "My grandfather used to say that grapes talk to you if you know how to listen," Hope told him one afternoon, as they watched the sunset from the terrace, "that each cluster has its own rhythm, its own story to tell." "Mine said something similar," Sebastian replied, "that a good winemaker doesn't make wine but helps the grapes become what they are destined to be." It was strange how, despite coming from such different worlds, they had inherited the same philosophy about wine. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring their paths together, even if the circumstances had been painful. But it wasn't all harmony. There were also days of tension, especially when Hope discovered new documents that revealed the extent of Sebastian's father's fraudulent activities. Each new piece of evidence was like a stab to the heart, not only because of the harm caused to her family, but because she saw how each revelation also hurt Sebastian. One Friday afternoon, while they were reviewing land purchase contracts from the last 10 years, Hope found something that took her breath away. Among the documents was a personal letter from Sebastian's father, addressed to a corrupt notary, where he described in detail how to manipulate the property records of Golden Valley. "The Miller family doesn't suspect a thing," the letter read. "The girl is very young, and the parents are simple folk. Once we have the falsified deeds, we can proceed with the forced sale. It's important that the process seems legal to avoid future investigations." Hope's hands trembled as she read. It wasn't just the confirmation of the scam, but the coldness with which they had been described. Simple folk, as if that made them less worthy of respect, less deserving of justice. "Hope," Sebastian said, who had seen the letter over her shoulder. "I didn't know." "Seriously?" she interrupted him, getting up abruptly from her chair. "Your father orchestrates the theft of 12 family properties, and you knew nothing. You lived in the same house, you worked in the same company, and you never wondered where all those new lands came from?" The question fell between them like a bomb. It was the first time Hope had confronted him directly, and the tension that had accumulated for weeks finally exploded. "I was 18 when it happened with your family," Sebastian replied, his voice tense. "I was studying in France. My father handled all the operational aspects of the company. When I came back, he presented the new vineyards to me as successful investment opportunities. And you never investigated. Why would I have?" Sebastian ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. "I trusted him. He was my father, my mentor. It didn't occur to me to think that he was a criminal." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Sebastian stood motionless with the expression of someone who had been slapped. "Yes," he finally said, his voice barely audible. "He was a criminal, and I was naive or cowardly enough not to see the signs that were probably there all along." Hope watched him for a long moment. She could see the genuine pain in his eyes, the guilt that was eating him up inside. But she could also feel her own rage, years of pain and humiliation that couldn't be erased with apologies. "I need time," she finally said. "I need to think about all this." "Hope, please." "No," she interrupted. "For 8 years, my family has carried the shame of having lost our lands. My father died thinking he had failed as a man, as a provider. My mother works herself to death to pay debts we never should have had. And meanwhile, you were building your empire on our ruins." She headed for the door but stopped before leaving. "I give you credit for wanting to make things right now. But goodwill doesn't bring back the lost years, Sebastian. It doesn't resurrect my father or erase my mother's tears." That night, Hope didn't sleep. She stayed awake in her small apartment that she shared with her mother in a modest neighborhood in New York, looking out the window at the city lights. Her mother, Carmen, who had returned from her job as a domestic worker, sat next to her on the worn-out second-hand sofa. "What's wrong, honey?" Carmen asked, with that maternal intuition that never fails. "You've seemed so worried for days." Hope had kept her partnership with Sebastian a secret, telling her mother that she had gotten a better job at a wine company. But that night, tired of carrying the weight of the truth alone, she told her everything. Carmen listened in silence, her face going through a full range of emotions. Surprise, pain, rage, and finally, something that looked like relief. "At last we know the truth," she said when Hope finished speaking. "All these years your father blamed himself. He thought he had made some mistake, that he hadn't been smart enough to protect what his grandparents had built. Mum, that man, Sebastian, is the son of the one who did this to us." "Yes, but he isn't his father," Carmen replied with that practical wisdom that only comes from years of suffering. "The question is, what kind of man is he? Is he taking advantage of you, or does he really want to make things right?" It was the question Hope had been asking herself for weeks, especially in those moments when they worked together, and she felt a connection that went beyond the professional. There was something in the way Sebastian looked at her, when he explained something about wine, an intensity that made her feel as if she were the only person in the world. And she had noticed how he stayed longer at the office when she was there, how he found excuses to touch her hand when he handed her documents, how his voice became softer when they talked alone. But was it genuine, or just sophisticated manipulation? "I don't know, Mom," she admitted. "Sometimes I think he's sincere. But then I remember who he is, where he comes from, and I wonder if I'm being a fool." "Look, honey," Carmen said, taking her daughter's hands in hers. "Life has taught us that people can surprise you, for better and for worse. Your father trusted everyone, and that almost destroyed us. But if you become so hard that you can't trust anyone, then they win in another way. What do you suggest? That you keep your eyes wide open. Use this opportunity to learn everything you can, to build your future. But don't let his guilt or your own rage prevent you from seeing things clearly. And if it turns out that he's a good man who's trying to atone for his father's mistakes, well, maybe fate is giving you something more than a chance for revenge." Her mother's words resonated in Hope's mind all weekend. On Monday morning, when she arrived at the Reed Vineyards offices, she found a manila envelope on her desk with her name written in Sebastian's elegant handwriting. Inside were copies of all the documents that proved his father's fraudulent activities, along with a notarized letter where Sebastian renounced any claim to the illegally acquired properties. But at the end of the envelope was something else, an old metal key tied with a red ribbon. Sebastian entered the office a few minutes later, clearly nervous. "What is this?" Hope asked, holding up the key. "It's the key to the main house of Golden Valley," he replied. "I kept it all these years because, I don't know, something told me I shouldn't destroy it. I went there yesterday for the first time since my father died." Hope felt her heart race. "And? The house is exactly as your family left it. My father never touched it, never renovated it or used it. It's like as if he knew that one day he would have to return it." The tears that Hope had been holding back for days finally began to roll down her cheeks. The house where she had grown up, where she had learned to love wine, where her grandfather had taught her the secrets of the land, it still existed. "There's something else," Sebastian continued. "I've been working with my lawyers to draft a proposal. I want to return all the properties to their original owners, at no cost. The families that are no longer interested in agriculture will receive full compensation at the current market value. Those who want to start cultivating again will receive technical and financial support to start over. That's going to cost you millions." "Yes," Sebastian admitted. "It will probably end the company as we know it, but I'd rather have a small company built on the right principles than an empire built on tears." Hope looked him in the eyes and, for the first time, saw something she hadn't seen before. Not just guilt or shame, but determination. A determination that came from the depths of his being. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you willing to sacrifice all this?" Sebastian approached her slowly, until he was only a few inches away. Hope could smell his cologne, a subtle mix of sandalwood and spices that somehow calmed and excited her at the same time. "Because for 32 years I've lived a lie," he said in a low but firm voice. "Because my father taught me to value money over people, power over integrity. And because—" he paused, as if the next words were the most difficult of his life. "Because the most extraordinary woman I've ever met is teaching me that there's something much more valuable than everything I thought I wanted." The air between them became thick, charged with a tension that wasn't just about justice or business. Hope felt her pulse quicken, a strange feeling in her stomach that had nothing to do with wine or companies. "Hope," Sebastian murmured, "I know I have no right to ask you this after everything my family did to you, but could you give me a chance? Not as a business partner, but as a man. To get to know you for real so you can get to know me without the shadows of the past between us." It was the question she had been fearing and hoping for at the same time. The question that could change everything between them, for better or for worse. Before she could answer, Sebastian's phone rang. It was his assistant, informing him that a delegation of French distributors had arrived for an important meeting that had been scheduled weeks in advance. "I have to go," Sebastian said, clearly frustrated by the interruption. "But Hope, think about it, please." When he left, Hope was left alone in the office with the old key in her hands and her heart beating as if she had run a marathon. Through the window she could see the mountains that surrounded New York, and beyond, invisible but present, the Napa Valley, where it had all begun. One part of her wanted to take the key and run directly to Golden Valley to see if her childhood home was really still there, intact like a museum of memories. Another part wanted to take the first bus away from New York and from Sebastian before emotions complicated an already impossible situation even further. But there was a third part, a part that had been growing stronger over the last few weeks, that wanted to stay, that wanted to see what would happen if for once in her life she bet not only on justice, but on the possibility of something more, something that could be called love, if she were brave enough to say the word. Chapter 3. The decision came to Hope 3 days later, in the most unexpected way. She was in the kitchen of her apartment, preparing morning coffee before going to work, when her mother came in with a pale face and an official envelope in her hands. "Honey, this arrived from the hospital," Carmen said in a trembling voice. "It's the results of my tests from last week." Hope felt the world wobble. Her mother had been having stomach pains and weight loss for months, but they had thought it was due to work stress and a poor diet. The doctors from the Social Security had ordered some routine studies, but hadn't seemed worried. With trembling hands, Hope opened the envelope and read the diagnosis. The words blurred in front of her eyes. "Malignant neoplasm, intermediate stage, immediate treatment required." "Cancer," she murmured, barely able to pronounce the word. Carmen sat heavily in one of the chairs at the small kitchen table. "The doctors say it's treatable if we start soon," she said, trying to sound brave but with a broken voice. "But it's going to be expensive, honey, very expensive. The Social Security covers the basics, but for the most effective treatments," she didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew that their combined savings would barely cover a month of the private treatments that could save her life. Hope hugged her mother, feeling panic and despair fighting in her chest. After all they had lost, after all the sacrifices, Life now threatened to take away the only thing she had left, her mother. An hour later, she was in Sebastian's office. The medical results spread out on his desk. He had read each page carefully, his expression growing more serious with each line. "The best oncologists are in Boston and Barcelona," he finally said. "I know someone at the MD Anderson Cancer Center who could see her next week. The expenses would be covered, of course." "I can't accept that," Hope replied automatically, even though every fiber of her being screamed for her to say yes. "Why not?" Because it would be like selling you my forgiveness, like putting a price on justice." Sebastian got up from his chair and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets. "What if it wasn't about forgiveness? What if it was simply about the fact that I can't stand the idea of you suffering any more pain because of decisions my father made?" The vulnerability in his voice made Hope's throat tighten. "It's not your responsibility to save my family." "No," Sebastian admitted, turning to her. "But I want to, not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because I love you." The words fell between them like petals on calm water, creating ripples that spread in wider and wider circles. Hope felt the air become thinner, more precious. "Sebastian, I know it's the worst possible time to tell you this," he continued, approaching slowly. "I know you have 1,000 reasons not to trust me, not to believe my motives, but I can't keep pretending that this is just about business or justice. I fell in love with your passion, your intelligence, the way you defend what you love. I fell in love with the woman who can identify a wine by its aroma and has the courage to stand up to a magnate on his own turf." Hope felt tears running down her cheeks without realizing when they had started. "It's so complicated." "I know," Sebastian said, now only a few inches from her. "I know I'm the last man in the world you should fall in love with. I know our story began with pain and betrayal. But I also know that what I feel for you is the most real and pure thing I've ever experienced in my life." Hope looked up at him, seeing a sincerity in his blue eyes that frightened her as much as it calmed her. "If I accept your help from my mum, if I accept to work with you, if I accept to explore what's between us, how can I be sure that it's not just guilt disguised as something else?" Sebastian held out his hands, palms up, in a gesture of complete vulnerability. You can't be sure," he admitted. "It's an act of faith, but I promise you this, no matter what happens between us, your mother will receive the best treatment available. No conditions, no expectations, because someone has to break the cycle of pain that my family started." Hope looked at those outstretched hands, hands that could represent her salvation or her destruction. In that moment, she thought of her grandfather, Michael, who always said that the best wines came from grapes that had gone through the most difficult conditions. Slowly, she placed her hands in his. "Okay," she whispered, "but with conditions. Whatever you want. First, my mother will never know that the treatment comes from you. If she asks, we'll invent that you got special health insurance through the company. Done. Second, this doesn't change anything regarding the stolen properties. All of them must be returned or compensated, without exception. I'm already working on that. And third," Hope paused, gathering courage for the most important condition. "If we're going to explore what's between us, it has to be step by step. I need time to separate my feelings for you from my pain over the past." Sebastian intertwined his fingers with hers. "All the time you need." A week later, Carmen Miller was in Boston, receiving the best oncological treatment available. The doctors were optimistic. They had detected the cancer in time, and the specific type responded well to the combined therapy. Hope had taken a temporary leave from the hotel to accompany her mother, and to her surprise, Sebastian had insisted on joining them. "You don't need to come," Hope had told him when he showed up at the airport with the suitcase. "Of course I don't need to," he had replied, "but I want to be there in case you need me." During the 2 weeks they spent in Boston, Hope saw a completely different side of Sebastian. She saw him bringing coffee to the nurses during night shifts, reading magazines aloud to her mother during chemotherapy sessions, and making sure they had the best hotel rooms near the hospital. But what impressed her the most was seeing him one night in the hospital chapel, simply sitting in silence. When she approached, she realized he had tears in his eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked, sitting next to him. "I was thinking about my father," he replied. "About all the times he was sick, and I didn't come to see him because I was too busy with the business. About how I lost the opportunity to really get to know him before he died. Sebastian, I don't want to make the same mistakes with the people I love now," he said, looking directly at her. "I don't want to realize too late what really matters." That night, as they walked back to the hotel under the lights of Boston, Hope felt that something fundamental had changed between them. It wasn't just physical attraction or gratitude for his help. It was a deeper connection, forged in moments of shared vulnerability. When they returned to New York, Carmen was much better. The doctors had been clear. The treatment had been successful, but she would need regular follow-ups for the next few years. Sebastian had made sure she had access to the best local oncologists and health insurance that would cover any future treatment. "That young man is special," Carmen told Hope one afternoon as they were having coffee on the terrace of their apartment. "At first I thought he was just trying to clear his conscience, but there's something more. The way he looks at you. It's like how your father used to look at me when we were young. Mom, it's very complicated. Love is always complicated, honey. The question is whether the complication is worth it." That question resonated in Hope's mind for days, and the answer came in the most unexpected way, when Sebastian fulfilled his promise to return Golden Valley. One Saturday morning, he arrived at her apartment with the old key and a nervous smile. "Ready to go home?" he asked. The trip to Napa took 2 hours. 2 hours full of memories that Hope had kept buried for years. When they finally arrived at the dirt road that led to the main house of Golden Valley, she felt her heart was going to jump out of her chest. And there it was. The 2-story adobe house where she had grown up, with its red tile roof and its large porch full of potted geraniums. Exactly as she remembered it, as if time had stopped the moment they had to leave. Sebastian stayed in the car, while Hope walked slowly toward the front door. With trembling hands, she inserted the old key into the lock. The door opened with a soft creak, and the familiar scent of old wood and lavender hit her like a wave of nostalgia. Everything was there. The wooden furniture her great-grandfather had made by hand, the family photos on the walls, even the lace curtains her grandmother had embroidered. In the kitchen, she found the clay pots where her mother used to make meatloaf, and in the study, her grandfather's viticulture books were still arranged on the shelves. When she got to her old room, she broke down. There was her single bed with the floral bedspread she had chosen for her 10th birthday, her desk where she had done homework for years, and on the wall, the drawings of vineyards she had made when she dreamed of following in her grandfather's footsteps. She sat on the bed and cried like she hadn't cried in years, not just for the loss but for the return, not just for the pain but for the possibility of healing. When she finally came out of the house, she found Sebastian walking among the vines. The vineyards had been perfectly maintained. Someone had continued to take care of them all these years. "Who has been taking care of this?" she asked. "Old man Jenkins, the foreman who worked for your family," Sebastian replied. "My father paid him to keep everything exactly as it was. I think deep down he knew that one day, that this wasn't really his." Hope walked among the vines, touching the leaves, recognizing the varieties her grandfather had planted. Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, all perfectly cared for, waiting for her return. "Sebastian," she finally said, "I want to accept the property back." "Of course. The papers are already ready. You just need to sign them. But there's something else I want." She turned to him, and Sebastian saw a determination in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. "I want you to be my partner, not out of guilt, not for compensation, but because I believe that together we can create something extraordinary here. Hope, over these months I've seen who you really are when you're not trying to carry your father's sins. I've seen your passion for wine, your integrity, your kindness, and I've seen how we work together, how our ideas complement each other." She approached him, taking his hands in hers. "But more than that, I've fallen in love with you, with the man who stayed up all night in the hospital with my mom, with the one who's willing to sacrifice an empire to do the right thing, with the one who looks at me as if I'm the most valuable thing in the world." Sebastian looked at her with an expression of disbelief and hope mixed together. "Are you sure? After everything that's happened?" "I'm sure that the past is over," Hope replied. "I'm sure your father made terrible mistakes, but you're not him. And I'm sure that if we're going to honor my family's memory and build something new, it has to be together." Sebastian took her in his arms, and for the first time since they had met, they kissed. It was a slow, tender kiss, full of all the words they hadn't been able to say, all the promises of a future that finally seemed possible. When they parted, the afternoon sun was painting the vineyards gold, and the air smelled of fertile earth and infinite possibilities. "So, partners?" Sebastian asked with a smile that completely transformed his face. "Partners," Hope confirmed. "But first, there's something we have to do." She led him to a small hill behind the house, where a century-old oak tree provided shade for a simple stone cross. It was her grandfather Michael's grave. "Grandpa," Hope said, kneeling next to the cross, "I bring you someone special. His family did a lot of harm to ours, but he's here to make things right. We're going to work together to make Golden Valley what you always dreamed it would be." Sebastian knelt next to her, and although it felt strange talking to someone he had never met, he found the right words. "Mr. Miller, I promise I'm going to take care of your granddaughter and honor everything you built here. I know I have no right to your forgiveness, but I hope to earn your respect." When they stood up, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree, as if the spirit of the old vintner had given his blessing. That night, as they drove back to New York, Hope felt for the first time in years that the future stretched out before her, full of promises instead of obstacles. She had her home back. She had a recovering mother. She had a man who loved her for real, and she had a dream she could finally pursue. But above all, she had something she had lost when she was just a teenager. The hope that good things could come from even the most painful circumstances, like the best grapes growing in the most difficult soils. Chapter 4. 6 months after returning to Golden Valley, Hope found herself living a life she never would have imagined possible. Every morning she woke up in the adobe house that had been renovated with love and respect for its history, listening to the birds singing among the vineyards that stretched as far as the eye could see. The property had grown. Sebastian had legally acquired adjacent lands to expand production, and what had once been 50 acres had now become 200 acres of prosperous vineyards. But the growth hadn't just been physical. The relationship between Hope and Sebastian had blossomed with the same delicacy and strength as the vines they cared for together. Each day brought new discoveries about the other, small moments of intimacy that were built on the solid foundation of mutual respect and shared passion. One October morning, as they were walking among the rows of Cabernet Sauvignon that were almost ready for harvest, Sebastian suddenly stopped and took Hope's hands in his. "I have something to tell you," he said, with a mysterious smile that she had learned to love. "I got a call from Bordeaux yesterday." Hope's heart raced. For months they had been working to get their first official wine, a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot that they had called Renaissance, recognized internationally. "The Concours Mondial de Bruxelles wants to include our Renaissance in this year's competition," Sebastian continued. "But there's more. Jacques Dubois, the most respected sommelier in France, wants to come personally to taste our wines and write an article about Golden Valley for Revue du Vin de France." Hope was speechless. It was more than they had dreamed of for their first year of production, but then a worry crossed her mind. "Sebastian, what if we're not ready? What if our wine isn't up to those expectations?" He looked at her with that tender expression he reserved just for her, that look that made her feel as if she could conquer the world. "Do you remember what you told me the first day we worked together in the lab?" he asked. "You said that the best wine doesn't come from technical perfection, but from genuine passion and respect for the land. Our wine has that, Hope. It has our history, our love, our dreams." He kissed her softly, a kiss that tasted of hope and the future. "Besides," he added with a mischievous smile, "I have something else to tell you. Yesterday, I also confirmed the last property returns. The 12 affected families have already recovered their lands or received full compensation. The Development Fund for Small Vintners is operating with a starting capital of $5 million, and we've already approved the first 10 projects." Hope felt tears of happiness running down her cheeks. For months, she had seen Sebastian work tirelessly to repair the damage caused by his father, selling urban properties, liquidating investments, and completely restructuring the company. Reed Vineyards was no longer the corporate giant it had been, but it had transformed into something much more valuable, a company with a soul. "That means," she began to say, "that there are no longer any outstanding debts with the past," Sebastian finished, "that we can finally look forward without carrying guilt, that we can build our future on clean foundations." That afternoon, as they prepared for the weekly meeting with the team of workers, Hope reflected on how her life had changed. Old Man Jenkins, the foreman who had cared for the property for years, had become her mentor and friend. The workers, many of whom had known her grandfather, had welcomed her back like a daughter returning home, and Sebastian had proven day after day that his commitment to justice and excellence wasn't a pose, but a genuine transformation. The meeting was held in the main courtyard of the house, in the shade of the same oak tree where her grandfather Michael's remains rested. It was a tradition they had established. Every Friday, the entire team would meet to review the week's progress and plan the next work. But it was also a time to celebrate achievements, share concerns, and keep the family spirit that had characterized Golden Valley from its beginnings alive. "Old Man Jenkins," Hope said, addressing the foreman, "how are the harvest preparations going?" The older man, with his worn straw hat and hands calloused from decades of working in the vineyards, smiled with pride. "Miss Hope, in my 40 years of working these lands, I've never seen the grapes so beautiful. The weather has been perfect, sun during the day, cool at night, and the rains came just when we needed them. Your grandfather would be very proud. Maria, Old Man Jenkins' daughter, who had returned from studying oenology in France specifically to work at Golden Valley, joined the conversation. Dad is right, she said. I've been doing sugar and acidity tests every week, and the numbers are exceptional. But more than that, there's something special about these grapes. It's as if the land itself knows that this harvest marks a new beginning. Sebastian, who had been listening in silence, approached Hope and whispered in her ear, "Do you know what I like most about these moments?" "What?" she asked, feeling the warmth of his breath on her cheek. "Seeing how you've brought the soul back to this place. When I first came here, it was just land and plants. Now it's a family." After the meeting, while the rest of the team went home, Hope and Sebastian stayed walking through the vineyards. It was something they had turned into a ritual, walking together at sunset, talking about the day, future plans, or simply enjoying each other's company in silence. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," Hope said as they stopped next to a row of Merlot. "You've never really told me what happened between you and your father in his last years. I know things were complicated, but—" Sebastian was silent for a moment, looking toward the mountains that rose at the end of the valley. "My father wasn't a bad man by nature," he finally said. "When I was a kid, he was different. He would take me to the vineyards, teach me about the different grape varieties, tell me stories about my grandfather and how he had started the business with just a few dollars and a dream. What changed?" "Success," Sebastian replied with bitterness. "When the company started to grow, when we began to compete with the big international distributors, he became obsessed with winning at any cost. He would say that the business world was a war, and that if you weren't ruthless, you would be destroyed." Hope took his hand, giving him the silent support he needed to continue. "When I turned 18, he sent me to study in France. He said I needed to understand the global market, that I needed international connections, but I think the truth was that he didn't want me to see what he was doing here in the US. When I came back 3 years later, it was already too late. The company I remembered no longer existed." "You never confronted him?" "I tried several times," Sebastian admitted, "but he had an answer for everything. He would say that small producers like your family were obstacles to progress, that consolidating lands into bigger companies was modernization. He had a way of making everything sound logical, necessary, even noble." They stopped next to an old stone bench that Hope's grandfather had built years ago. They sat together, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky with oranges and pinks. "Do you know when I realized the truth?" Sebastian continued. "It was the night I met you. When you said the name Golden Valley, something sparked in my memory. I remembered seeing that name on documents. I remembered whispered conversations between my father and his lawyers. For the first time in years, I started asking questions that I had been avoiding. It must have been horrible to discover that everything you thought you knew was a lie." "Yes and no," Sebastian said, looking directly at her. "It was horrible to discover the truth about my father, about the company, about my own willful blindness, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my life, I had the opportunity to be the man I really wanted to be, not the one he had tried to mold." Hope felt a wave of tenderness for this man who had had the courage to destroy everything he knew to build something better. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Sacrificing so much to do the right thing?" Sebastian turned to her, taking her face in his hands. "How could I regret the decisions that brought me to you?" he said softly. "Hope, before I met you, I was a successful but empty man. I had money, power, respect, but I had no purpose. I had no love. I had no real reason to wake up every morning." He kissed her tenderly, a kiss that tasted of promises and eternity. "Now, every day I spend with you, every moment we work together in these vineyards, every glass of wine we create with our own hands, is more valuable than everything I lost. You've taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in purpose." That night, as they had dinner on the terrace of the house lit by candles and the stars of the Napa sky, Hope felt a happiness so profound it almost scared her. It was as if the universe had conspired to give her everything she had lost, multiplied by 10. Her mother, Carmen, who now lived with them and had become the unofficial administrator of the house, joined them for dessert, homemade flan accompanied by a glass of the Renaissance they had opened to celebrate the good news of the day. "Honey," Carmen said, raising her glass, "I want to make a toast." Hope and Sebastian raised their glasses, waiting. "To my daughter, who had the courage to turn pain into purpose. To Sebastian, who proved that the mistakes of the past don't have to define our future. And to this place, Golden Valley, which has taught us that some things that seem lost forever can blossom again, more beautiful than before." "Cheers!" they said in unison, and the sound of the glasses clinking resonated in the night like celestial music. After Carmen retired to her room, Hope and Sebastian stayed on the terrace, embracing under the stars. The night air carried the scent of the vines and the lavender flowers they had planted around the house. "Hope," Sebastian said suddenly, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you for weeks." "What is it? Are you happy? Truly happy? Because sometimes I worry that you've accepted all this, us out of gratitude or a sense of duty, not because it's what you really want." Hope separated slightly, so she could look him in the eyes. "Sebastian Reed," she said in a firm but loving voice, "do you really need to ask me that? Maybe I need to hear it." Hope smiled, that luminous smile that completely transformed her. "I'm happier than I thought possible, not just for having my home back, not just for the success of the winery, but for having you, for waking up every morning knowing that I'm going to spend the day with my best friend, my partner, my lover, the man who makes me laugh and challenges me to be a better person every day." She moved closer to him until their foreheads touched. "When I was a little girl, I used to sit under the oak tree where my grandfather is buried and dream about the future. I dreamed of being a winemaker, of making wines that told stories, of finding a love like the one my grandparents had. But never, not in my wildest dreams, did I imagine that all of that could be so perfect." "Perfect?" Sebastian asked with an amused smile. "Even with all the complication of our history?" "Especially because of that complication," Hope replied, "because it has taught us to value what we have, not to take anything for granted. The best love stories aren't the ones that start easily, but the ones that overcome impossible obstacles." They kissed again, a slow, deep kiss that seemed to seal all the promises they had made, all the hopes they shared for the future. When they parted, Sebastian had a mysterious expression on his face. "Speaking of love stories that overcome obstacles, there's something I've been planning." "What is it?" "A surprise, but you'll have to wait until tomorrow to find out." Hope looked at him with curiosity, but she knew that when Sebastian was determined to keep a secret, it was impossible to make him talk. "Okay," she finally said, "but it better be worth the wait." "Oh, it will be," he replied with a smile that promised much more than he said. That night, as she fell asleep in Sebastian's arms, Hope felt that her life had finally found the perfect balance. The past had been healed, the present was more beautiful than she had dreamed, and the future stretched out before them full of infinite possibilities. She didn't know that the next day, Sebastian would ask her a question that would change their lives forever, or that that question would be accompanied by a revelation that would test everything they thought they knew about their history together. But for now it was enough to be there, in the house where she had grown up, next to the man she loved, surrounded by the vineyards that represented not only her livelihood, but her legacy and her future. It was enough to be happy. Chapter 5. Sebastian's surprise came at dawn the next day, in the most romantic way Hope could have ever imagined. When she opened her eyes, he was no longer in bed, but on the nightstand there was a red rose with a note written in his elegant handwriting. "Follow me. Your destiny awaits." Intrigued and still in her pajamas, Hope followed a trail of rose petals that led her from her room, down the stairs, through the main courtyard, and toward the vineyards. Every few feet there was another note. "This is where I fell in love with your laugh. This is where I understood that I wanted to spend my life with you. This is where I decided that love is worth more than pride." The trail finally led her to the hill where her grandfather Michael was buried, but when she got there she gasped. The place had been transformed into something magical. Hundreds of candles floated in small crystal containers hung from the branches of the oak tree, creating a canopy of golden lights. The ground was covered with rose petals, and there was a small table with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. But what made her cry with emotion was seeing Sebastian kneeling next to her grandfather's grave, not looking at her, but speaking softly to the stone headstone. "Mr. Miller," he was saying, "I know I have no right to ask you this, considering what my family did to yours, but I've come to love your granddaughter more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. She has taught me what honor, perseverance, and forgiveness mean. She has made me a better man." Hope approached silently, with tears running down her cheeks. "I want to ask for your blessing to marry Hope," Sebastian continued. "I promise I will love her and protect her every day of my life. I promise I will honor everything you built here, that I will care for Golden Valley as if it was sacred, and I promise that our children will know your story, that they will know that all the good things in their lives began with your love for this land and your family." At that moment, Sebastian realized that Hope was there. He turned to her, and in his hands he held a small blue velvet box that shone under the candlelight. "Hope Miller," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "will you do me the honor of being my wife?" He opened the box, revealing the most beautiful ring she had ever seen. It wasn't ostentatious or excessively large, but perfectly elegant. a solitaire diamond surrounded by small emeralds that recalled the color of her eyes, mounted on a white gold band that had been engraved with delicate vines. Hope was speechless for a moment, overwhelmed by the beauty of the moment, the depth of the gesture of asking her grandfather for permission, the perfection of the chosen place. "Yes," she finally whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." When Sebastian put the ring on her finger, it fit perfectly, as if it had been destined to be there. They kissed under the canopy of lights, and Hope felt that her grandfather, in some way, was there with them, giving his blessing to this union that transformed pain into joy, conflict into harmony. "How did you know the size?" she asked, admiring the ring. "Your mum helped me," Sebastian confessed with a smile. "She was the one who suggested the emeralds, and who gave me permission to propose to you. She says she's never seen you as happy as you've been in these last few months." They spent the next hour under the oak tree, planning their future while drinking champagne and watching the sun rise over the vineyards. They wanted a small, intimate wedding, celebrated right here at Golden Valley, with only their closest family and friends. They wanted it to be during the harvest season, when the vineyards were at their most splendid. "There's something else I want to tell you," Sebastian said as they were collecting the candles. "Something about our past that I discovered a few days ago." Hope felt a small knot in her stomach. They had talked so much about total honesty, about not having secrets between them. "What is it?" "I was going through more of my father's documents, organizing his personal papers to donate them to the historical archive, when I found something unexpected." He took an old yellowed photograph from his pocket. Hope took it and was perplexed. It was a photo of two young men embracing and smiling, standing in front of a vineyard. One of them was clearly Sebastian's father, but 20 years younger. The other, "It's my grandfather Michael," Hope murmured, recognizing the green eyes so similar to hers, the warm smile she remembered from her childhood. "Turn it over," Sebastian said softly. On the back of the photograph, written in her grandfather's hand, was, "To my dear friend William, who will one day understand that friendship is worth more than money. Michael Miller, Golden Valley, 1995. Hope looked at Sebastian with confusion. "I don't understand." "My grandfather never talked about being friends with your father." "That's not all," Sebastian said, pulling out another paper. "I found letters, many letters. Hope, our fathers were best friends for years. They met when my father was starting out in the wine business, and your grandfather was already a respected vintner. Your grandfather was the one who taught him everything about the American terroir, who introduced him to the best suppliers, who even lent him money when my father almost went bankrupt in 1998. Hope felt the world wobble around her. "But then, why? Why did my grandfather never mention this? Why did your father betray his friend?" Sebastian showed her one of the letters, dated just 6 months before Hope's grandfather's death. "Read this," he said in a soft voice. The letter was from William Reed to Michael Miller. "Dear Michael, I know what I'm about to propose might seem crazy, but listen to me before you reject it. The wine industry is changing. The big international corporations are buying up all the small properties. If we don't consolidate, they will destroy us one by one. I propose a merger, your expertise and my capital. We could create something powerful, something that preserves the best of our traditions while competing in the global market. Think about it, old friend William." There was also a reply from Michael. "William, I appreciate your concern, but I can't accept. Golden Valley isn't just a business to me, it's a family legacy. It's the history of my people, the land my grandparents watered with sweat and tears. I can't turn it into just another one of your properties. I hope you understand. Your friend always, Michael." "After that letter, the correspondence gets colder," Sebastian explained. "And then, nothing. Until I found this." He showed her the last letter, dated a week after Hope's grandfather's death. "Michael is no longer here to defend himself. I'm going to take what should have been mine from the beginning. His family will pay for his arrogance." Hope sank onto the stone bench, overwhelmed by the revelations. "Your father didn't just steal our lands," she murmured. "He betrayed his best friend. He waited for my grandfather to die to attack us when we were most vulnerable." "Yes," Sebastian admitted, his voice breaking. "And there's more. In one of the previous letters, my father mentions that he promised to be your baptismal godfather." "Hope, my father was your godfather." The information fell on Hope like an avalanche. Not only had they been robbed by a greedy stranger, but betrayed by someone her family had trusted completely, someone who had been like an uncle to her. "Why didn't I know this?" she asked, with tears running down her cheeks. "Why did my parents never tell me?" "I think your family tried to protect you from the pain of betrayal," Sebastian replied. "It's one thing to lose your home due to economic circumstances, and a very different thing to discover that someone you loved deliberately destroyed you. Hope was silent for long minutes, processing all the information. Finally, she looked at Sebastian with an expression he couldn't interpret. "Sebastian," she said slowly, "did you know this when you proposed to me?" "No," he replied immediately. "I discovered it yesterday, after I had already planned all this. I was going to wait to tell you, but I didn't want to start our marriage with secrets between us." "And does it change anything for you, knowing that our families were so connected?" Sebastian took her hands in his. "The only thing that changes is that now I understand why I felt so connected to you from the very first moment. It wasn't just physical attraction or professional admiration. It was as if my soul recognized something familiar in yours." "And for you," he asked her, "does it change anything to know that my father wasn't just a criminal, but a traitor?" Hope looked at the ring on her finger, then at the vineyards that stretched around them, and finally into the blue eyes of the man she loved. "You know what's the strangest thing?" she finally said. "For years I hated your father without a face, like an abstract force that had destroyed my family. Now that I know he had a face, that he was someone we knew and trusted, it's almost easier to forgive." "How is that possible?" "Because now I understand that his betrayal wasn't about us. It was about him, about his inability to value what truly mattered, and because I see that you have chosen a completely different path. You have chosen to honor the friendship he destroyed." She got up and walked toward her grandfather's grave. "Grandpa," she said out loud, "now I understand why you never told me about your friendship with William Reed. You wanted to protect me from the pain of knowing that someone we trusted betrayed us. But I want you to know that his son is different. Sebastian has shown that character is not inherited, that each person can choose who they want to be." She turned to Sebastian. "And I want you to know that I'm going to marry you not despite our complicated history, but because you've had the courage to face it and transform it into something beautiful." Sebastian took her in his arms, and in that moment, they felt that they had finally come full circle. The pain of the past had been acknowledged, honored, and transformed into wisdom. The future was no longer shadowed by secrets or unresolved guilt. "There's one last thing," Sebastian said. "I want to change the company name. It will no longer be Reed Vineyards. It will be Miller Reed, honoring both your legacy and our new beginning." "Are you sure?" Hope asked. "It's a name with a lot of history." "Exactly," Sebastian replied. "It's time to write a new story." As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Hope felt that a weight she didn't know she was carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. There were no longer any secrets between them, no outstanding debts with the past. There was only love, hope, and the bright future they would build together, but neither of them knew that they would soon face the most difficult test of their relationship, a crisis that would force them to choose between love and everything they had built together. Chapter 6. 3 months after the engagement, when the wedding preparations were in full swing, and the first official harvest of Miller Reed was in the French oak barrels that Sebastian had specially imported for the occasion, the news arrived that would change everything. Hope was in the lab, analyzing the fermentation samples of the Renaissance 2025, when Maria burst in with a pale face and an official envelope in her hands. "Hope, this arrived by urgent courier," she said in a trembling voice. "It's from the federal government." The envelope bore the seal of the Department of Agriculture and Urban Development. With hands that began to tremble for no apparent reason, Hope opened it and read the contents. The words blurred in front of her eyes, but the message was clear. The government had decided to build a highway connecting Napa to Sacramento, and the most efficient route passed directly through the center of Golden Valley. The expropriation would be for cause of public utility, and although they offered fair compensation, the proposed amount was less than half the real value of the property. But the most devastating thing was the deadline. They had 60 days to vacate or face forced eviction. "It can't be," Hope murmured, rereading the document again and again, as if the words would change by magic. "This can't be happening again." When Sebastian arrived that afternoon from a meeting with distributors in Los Angeles, he found Hope sitting in the courtyard, the notification in her hands, and her gaze lost on the horizon. "What's wrong, love?" he asked, sitting next to her. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Without a word, Hope handed him the document. As Sebastian read, she watched his expression go from confusion to disbelief, and finally to a fury she had never seen in him. "This is impossible," he said, getting up abruptly. "We just got these lands back. We've invested millions in renovations, in equipment, in the vineyards. They can't just—" "Yes, they can," Hope interrupted in a flat voice. "It's the same law they used to take it from us the first time. Expropriation for public utility. The difference is that this time it's real." Sebastian began to pace back and forth, his legal mind already working on possible solutions. "We're going to fight this," he said with determination. "I have the best lawyers in the country. We can challenge the valuation, we can argue that there are alternative routes, we can— Sebastian, Hope interrupted him softly. My family already lost this battle once, and they had right on their side. But we have more resources, more connections. And then what? Hope asked, getting up to face him. How much time are we going to spend in court? How much money are we going to spend? How much energy are we going to waste fighting against windmills? The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Carmen, who had gone to the town to do some shopping and had heard the rumors. Honey, she said in a tired voice, the whole town is talking about the highway. They say it's already decided that the machines will be here in 2 months. That night, the house that had been filled with joy and wedding plans felt like a wake. Carmen had retired to her room early, exhausted by the news. Hope and Sebastian stayed on the terrace, but this time the silence between them wasn't comfortable, but tense and full of unanswered questions. Do you know what hurts me the most? Hope finally said. It's not losing the lands again. It's the feeling that nothing we do really matters, that no matter how much we fight, how much we sacrifice, how much love we put into something, there's always going to be someone more powerful who can take it away from us. Sebastian approached her, but for the first time since they had met, Hope recoiled from his touch. Don't say that, he said. We're going to find a solution. There always is. Really? Hope's voice had an edge he had never heard before. Like the solution your father found when he wanted my grandfather's lands. The words fell between them like a slap. Sebastian stood motionless, hurt by the comparison. That's not fair, Hope. You know I would never— I know, she apologized immediately, running her hands through her hair in frustration. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. It's just that I'm tired. I'm tired of fighting for the same things over and over again. Over the next few days, the tension at Golden Valley was palpable. Sebastian immersed himself in phone calls with lawyers, politicians, and anyone who might have influence over the decision. Hope, for her part, dedicated herself to the vineyards with an almost obsessive intensity, as if she wanted to absorb every moment she had left on that land. The crisis reached its peak a week later, when Sebastian returned from a meeting in the capital with news that would change everything. I have good news and bad news, he announced, finding Hope in the cellar, where she had been tasting the latest fermentation samples. Tell me the bad news first. The highway is going to be built. There's no way to stop it. It's part of a national infrastructure plan that has already received international funding. Hope nodded, as if she had been expecting that confirmation. And the good news? I have an offer. The government is willing to negotiate a much higher compensation if we don't fight the expropriation. Enough to buy equivalent lands anywhere in the country and re-establish the operation. How much? Sebastian mentioned a figure that made Hope's eyes widen in surprise. It was more than Golden Valley would be worth on the open market, enough to start over anywhere. There's a condition, Sebastian continued. We have to sign a confidentiality agreement. We can't talk publicly about the expropriation. We can't use it as an example of government injustice. They want to buy our silence in addition to the lands. Basically, yes. Hope was silent for several minutes, processing the information. What do you think? She finally asked. Honestly, I think we should take the money and start over. We can find better lands with a better climate, closer to the export markets. We can build an operation from scratch, without the limitations of the old buildings or the old vineyards. Is that what you really think? Sebastian approached her, taking her hands in his. What I really think is that I want to marry you no matter where we are. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you, and if that means starting over somewhere else, I'm willing to do it. It was a beautiful and romantic answer, but Hope could detect something in his voice, a doubt that he himself didn't want to admit. But there's something else, isn't there? Sebastian sighed, letting go of her hands. My partner in France is offering to expand our operations there. He says that with the compensation capital, we could buy vineyards in Bordeaux, in Champagne. We could become real international producers. And that's what you want? I don't know, Sebastian admitted. A year ago I would have said yes without a doubt, but now I'm not sure what I want besides being with you. That night, Hope didn't sleep. She stayed awake on the terrace, looking at the stars, and trying to imagine her life anywhere but Golden Valley. She could visualize vineyards in France, in California, in Chile. She could see herself and Sebastian working together, creating exceptional wines, traveling the world. It was a life many people would envy. But every time she tried to feel excited about those possibilities, all she felt was a deep emptiness in her chest. At dawn, Carmen joined her on the terrace with 2 cups of coffee. You didn't sleep at all, did you, honey? I couldn't. Do you want to talk about it? Hope told her the entire conversation with Sebastian, all the options they had, all the doubts that tormented her. You know what confuses me the most, she finally said. Sebastian is right. We could take the money and create something incredible anywhere in the world. It would be the practical decision, the smart decision. So why do I feel like I'm betraying everything I believe in? Carmen took a sip of her coffee before answering. Because this land isn't just your business, honey. It's your home. It's where your ancestors are buried, where you learned to love wine, where you fell in love. You can't replace that with money. Damn it, I also can't ask Sebastian to sacrifice his future for my sentimentality. Has he asked you to sacrifice yours for his ambition? The question made Hope stop. She realized that throughout the entire conversation the day before, they had talked about what he wanted, about the opportunities he saw, about the plans he had, but he had never asked her what she wanted. Not exactly, she admitted, but he's assuming I'm going to agree to move. And are you? Hope looked toward the vineyards where Old Man Jenkins was already working among the vines, as he had done every day for the last 40 years. No, she finally said, her voice firm. I'm not. This is my land, Mom. My grandfather is buried here. My roots are here. This is where I want to raise my children. I'm not going to run away again. Then tell him. What if he decides it's not worth it to stay? Carmen took her daughter's hands in hers. Honey, if a man truly loves you, he's going to want to be where you're happy. And if not, then he's not the right man for you. The conversation with Sebastian took place that same afternoon, in the place where they had gotten engaged, under the century-old oak tree. Hope had decided to be completely honest, regardless of the consequences. I've made a decision, she said without preamble. I'm not going to accept the compensation. Sebastian looked at her in surprise. What do you mean? I mean, I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight in court. I'm going to fight in the press. I'm going to fight in the streets if necessary. I'm not going to give up this land without a fight. Hope, we already talked about this. It's a battle we can't win. Maybe not, she admitted. But it's a battle I have to fight. This land is part of me, Sebastian. It's not just a business or an investment. It's my identity, my history, my future. And if I can't defend it, then I don't know who I am. Sebastian ran his hands through his hair, clearly frustrated. And what about us? What about our plans? What about our wedding? That decision is yours, Hope replied, although it hurt her heart to say it. If you want to take the money and go to France, I'll understand. If you want a wife who is practical and ambitious and doesn't cling to the past, then maybe I'm not the right woman for you. How can you say that? Because it's true, Hope said with tears in her eyes but a firm voice. I love you, Sebastian. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone, but I can't be someone I'm not even for love. They were silent for long minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Sebastian got up and walked toward the edge of the hill, looking out at the vineyards that stretched to the horizon. Do you know what my father told me before he died? He asked suddenly. What? He told me that the biggest mistake of his life hadn't been betraying your grandfather. It had been allowing ambition to be more important than relationships, that success was more valuable than loyalty. He told me he had gained an empire but had lost his soul. He turned to her, and Hope could see tears in his eyes. All my life I've tried not to make the same mistakes he did, but now I realized that I was about to make the biggest one of all, choosing ambition over love. He approached her, taking her hands in his. Hope, I don't want vineyards in France. I don't want to be an international magnate. I want to be here with you, on this land you love, fighting for what we believe is right. I want our children to grow up under this same oak tree, listening to the same stories you heard. Are you sure? Hope asked, barely daring to believe what she was hearing. We could lose everything. We could end up with nothing. Not nothing, Sebastian corrected her. As long as I have you, I'll never have nothing. They kissed under the branches of the oak tree, a kiss that tasted of eternal promises and irrevocable decisions. The next 2 months were the most intense of their lives. Sebastian hired the best legal team in the country and began a media campaign to expose the injustice of the expropriation. Hope became the spokesperson for the movement, giving interviews on television, speaking at public forums, organizing peaceful protests. The story touched a nerve in the country. Golden Valley became the symbol of the fight of small producers against government and corporate interests. International journalists came to cover the story, and public pressure began to grow. But the real surprise came when they least expected it. One afternoon, 3 weeks before the eviction deadline, a caravan of official cars arrived at Golden Valley. The Secretary of Agriculture himself got out of the main vehicle, accompanied by engineers, lawyers, and representatives of the construction company. Mr. and Mrs. Miller-Reed, the Secretary said, shaking their hands, I've come to propose a solution that could benefit everyone. The proposal was ingeniously simple. Instead of destroying Golden Valley, the highway would be slightly diverted to the north, passing through less productive lands. The change of route would add only 8 miles to the project and increase the cost by less than 2%, but it would preserve one of the most iconic vineyards in the US. Why now? Sebastian asked. Why didn't you consider this option from the beginning? The secretary smiled with a mixture of admiration and shame. Because sometimes we need to be reminded that progress doesn't always require destroying what is valuable. Your fight has touched the president's heart. He himself grew up in a family of farmers, and he understands what the land means to you. Besides, one of the engineers added, the new route is actually technically superior. Better drainage, fewer curves, less environmental impact. We should have considered it from the start. That night, Golden Valley celebrated like it hadn't celebrated in years. Old Man Jenkins opened a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. Maria prepared a feast with local products, and even workers from neighboring farms came to join the celebration. Do you know what's the most incredible thing about all this? Hope said to Sebastian as they danced under the stars, with country music playing in the background. What? That in the end, winning the battle gave us something more valuable than the land itself. What is that? The certainty that we're a real team, that when things get difficult, we fight together instead of running in opposite directions. Sebastian kissed her tenderly. Does that mean you're ready to marry this idealistic dreamer who prefers fighting windmills to conquering empires? It means I couldn't love any other kind of man. The wedding took place a month later, exactly as they had originally planned, at Golden Valley during the harvest season, when the vineyards shone golden under the October sun. Carmen walked down the aisle with Hope, as they had both decided it was time to let go of the pain of the past and celebrate the joy of the present. Sebastian waited at the makeshift altar under the century-old oak tree, dressed in an elegant grey suit that made his blue eyes stand out. When he saw Hope approaching in the lace dress that had belonged to her grandmother, he felt his heart was going to jump out of his chest. "Who gives this woman in marriage?" the priest asked. "Her family gives her," Carmen replied. "But she gives herself, because she is a free woman who chooses to love." During the ceremony, they exchanged vows they had written themselves. "Hope," Sebastian said, "I promise to love you on the easy days and the difficult days, in abundance and in scarcity, in joy and in pain. I promise to be your partner in all the dreams you want to pursue and your refuge in all the storms we have to face. I promise to honor your past, build our present, and dream our future, always by your side." "Sebastian," Hope replied, "I promise to love you not despite our complicated past, but because that past taught us the value of forgiveness, the strength of perseverance, and the beauty of redemption. I promise to be your partner in building something beautiful on the ruins of what was destroyed. I promise that our love will be like the best wine, getting better with time, deepening with age, and always being a celebration of life." When the priest declared them husband and wife, the first toast was with a glass of the Renaissance 2025, the wine they had created together during their first year of partnership. "To Golden Valley," Sebastian said, raising his glass. "To the love that transforms," Hope added. "To second chances," Carmen concluded. 5 years later, as Hope rocked her 6-month-old son on the terrace of the house that now housed 4 generations of the Miller-Reed family, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them there. Golden Valley had become one of the most respected vineyards in the US. Their wines won international awards regularly, and the love story behind the brand had captured the imagination of people all over the world. More importantly, the fund for small vintners they had established had helped more than 50 families start their own projects. Sebastian approached from the vineyards with dirt on his hands and satisfaction in his eyes. At 37, he had finally found the peace he had been looking for all his life. "How's our little Michael?" he asked, stroking the baby's cheek. "Sleeping like an angel," Hope replied. Like his father after a day of work in the vineyards, he sat next to her, taking her free hand in his. "Do you ever imagine what our life would have been like if we had made different decisions?" he asked. "Sometimes," Hope admitted. "But then, I look at all this, our son, our land, our family, our community, and I can't imagine a more perfect life. Not even the vineyards in France." Hope laughed, that musical sound that Sebastian had learned to love more than any symphony, especially not the vineyards in France. "Here we have something that money can't buy, true home." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky with oranges and pinks, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the century-old oak tree. The air was a mix of the aroma of ripe grapes, lavender flowers, and the promise of another abundant harvest. Old Man Jenkins, now 80 but still working the vineyards with the energy of a man half his age, came over to report on the day's progress. Boss lady," he said with a smile, The grapes are perfect. Tomorrow we can start the harvest of the north section. Thank you, old man Jenkins, Sebastian replied. Did your granddaughter confirm she's coming to help during the harvest? Yes, boss. Maria arrives on Monday. She studied enology in France like your wife, and she's very excited to work at Golden Valley. When old man Jenkins left, Hope and Sebastian stayed in silence, enjoying the tranquility of the sunset and the perfection of the moment. Do you know what I like most about our story? Hope finally said. What? That it started with a broken glass and ended with raised glasses in celebration. That what seemed like the end turned out to be the beginning. That pain was transformed into joy, betrayal into trust, and loss into love. Sebastian kissed her forehead tenderly. Our story hasn't ended, love, it's just beginning. He was right. As they rocked their son under the Napa stars, surrounded by the vineyards that represented not only their livelihood but their legacy, Hope and Sebastian knew they had found something more valuable than all the empires in the world. They had found true love, built on foundations of honesty, forgiveness, and the firm belief that the best things in life grow slowly, like the most noble vines. And in the years to come, as their children grew up among the rows of grapes and learned the secrets that the earth held in every golden grain, the story of Hope and Sebastian would become a legend, the story of two hearts that transformed pain into beauty, revenge into justice, and hatred into eternal love. Like the best wine, their love had gotten better with time, deepening with every challenge overcome, becoming more complex and beautiful with every passing year. And like the best love stories, theirs had no end, but was renewed every day with the promise of building something beautiful together, one sip at a time, one harvest at a time, a whole life of shared happiness. Dear girlfriends, we have reached the end of this beautiful story of Hope and Sebastian, a story that teaches us that true love isn't the one that comes easy, but the one that remains when things get difficult. That forgiveness is not weakness, but the most powerful force in the world, and that sometimes the best things in life are born from the most painful experiences. If this story touched your heart, if you identified with Hope's struggle to defend what she loved, or if you simply enjoyed this emotional journey we shared together, you would make me very happy if you like this story, so more people can find it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that go straight to the soul. Comment from which city you're reading us. I love to know where our readers are. Share which part of the story moved you the most. Suggest what kind of story you would like to hear next week. Remember, every woman deserves a love story like Hope's, where she is valued, respected, and loved for who she truly is. Don't settle for less than you deserve, because somewhere in the world, there is someone who will see you as the treasure you are. See you in the next story, beautiful.